Almost 5 decades later, it's the only classic rock album that continues to gain new generations of fans, top streamings, and sales charts. Alan Light is the author of a brand new book. He's going to explain why millions of fans still love Fleetwood Mac's Rumours.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich, very excited to talk to this episode's guest, Alan Light. He's the author of Don't Stop, Why We Still Love Fleetwood Mac's Rumours. Alan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Of course, Eric. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This is interesting. The focus of the book is on what makes Rumours stand out among other classic albums. In 2023, it was the most streamed album of the 20th century on Spotify. Dreams, more than 2 billion plays. And I was just saying before we started recording, there's an article I just saw that I think it topped another Spotify chart. It beat out Taylor Swift, I think, in sales.
Yeah, and Billboard just put their year-end chart up, and it was the last year, 2024, it was the biggest selling rock album on the Billboard charts, old or new. 2025, I guess they combined rock and alternative to one chart, so it was number 3 behind Billie Eilish and Noah Kahan. New records, newish records, certainly for something that is almost 50 years old. A really extraordinary thing to see that it continues to retain this level of popularity, this level of sales and streams. And that was really what I wanted to look at in the book was, sure, the story of the making of the greatest soap opera of all time that we know Rumours is, but more than that, how does this thing continue to live in the world? How does it continue to thrive and to draw these new audiences, younger audiences, and younger listeners in a way that seems really different, really unique, and really special, particularly compared to its peers in the classic rock canon.
And beyond statistics, you have your son that
Yes.
provided some context, right? Talk about that.
Yeah, well, starting from not just, my son is a big music fan, and that's one kind of thing, but it was when he was in high school a few years back that I just noticed when if his friends were over or whatever it was, that they were all aware of Rumours. They all knew something about this record. They had some relationship to it as an album, as a body of work. Maybe didn't know every song on it, whatever it was, but they were not interested in Hotel California, Born to Run. These were old records to them. Those were not relevant to their lives now. But Rumours continued to be something that they listened to. It seemed like the way that they listened to pop records, that it was something that spoke to them, something that connected for them. Looking, then, as you mentioned, at the stats and seeing, this is not some isolated phenomenon that I happen to be observing, but is backed up by these numbers and by what listening habits really seem to indicate. And then sort of peeling back beyond that to think about all of the different ways that it has continued to appear and to regenerate in the culture, whether that was the guy on the skateboard with the cranberry juice that was the big explosive TikTok moment in 2020, whether it was the All Rumours episode of Glee, whether it was Daisy Jones and the Six, the book, or the TV series, that it just felt like every few years there was something that was contributing to reintroducing these songs. And again, connecting those, some of these are happening. The TikTok things, God knows why they happen. They happen because people discover and respond to them. But the others, the placements and the series that are designed out of these stories, that's because people continue to love this music, love this story, love everything around it. And people know that there's an audience that still wants to be part of that. So looking at the stories of each of those events and incidents along the way, as well as sort of looking under the hood at these numbers, talking to a whole bunch of post-millennials I think I talked to about 30, under 30, about their relationship to the album, how they discovered it, what it means to them, to producers who could talk better than I could about the sound of this album and the creation and the assembly of these songs. There seemed to be a lot of different ways in to look at the continued life around this project and what a special story it really is.
You break down each track and how it's perceived by the younger audience today and why it stands up and which songs. It's interesting. There's one or two that do okay with the younger generation, but it is true about the way the album starts. It's not what you're going to normally hear on a huge commercially successful album with secondhand news, right? I mean, that is interesting in itself, just the way they decided to start it off.
It's funny. I mean, you mentioned that the sort of center of the book is going song by song, and a lot of those were matching up these stories. I mean, for the Dreams chapter, I knew I was going to talk about the guy on the skateboard and the TikTok explosion around that song and then around this album. So about half of them were very easy to figure out, okay, this story goes with this song. And then some of them were themes that I knew or stories that I knew I wanted to address and which songs those might line up with. You mentioned, and we can come back to it, Oh Daddy is kind of the least loved song on this album. But because Christine McVie wrote that song for Mick Fleetwood and about his role as the sort of father figure in the band and the one of them who was a parent at the time, I knew somewhere I wanted to write about Mick and about the rhythm section. And okay, I could do that within that song. That works. The hardest one to figure out was Secondhand News, which is the opening track on the album, because there isn't any other placement or other usage or some other, place in the world where that song has reappeared. But what I realized thinking about it is how, completely different it is from the opening song on any other album that's the kind of mega blockbuster album that Rumours is. Appetite for Destruction opens with Welcome to the Jungle. Thriller opens with Wanna Be Starting Something. Zeppelin 4 opens with Rock and Roll, like big statement, mission statement kind of songs for those albums. Here's the ride we're going on. Let me tell you how we're kicking this thing off. And Secondhand News is this kind of little, it starts on a fade in, and it's kind of a not fully finished song. I mean, clearly when he's singing the bow, 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 like there should be a guitar solo there that we'll just do this. We'll just sort of scat sing through it. So it was the chance to sort of come in backwards and write about, obviously it worked. The album is it's the 7th biggest selling album of all time. It continues to be embraced in the ways that it does. It's not like it doesn't connect with people, but in a very, very different way than anything else sort of in its peer group, and how everything else kind of explodes out of the gate. And this kind of sneaks up on you a little bit.
Yeah. A head fake, a Trojan horse, as you call it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that one person says it's a good, perfect song to bike to. It's interesting what people get out of these songs. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that, in some ways the most interesting thing for me talking to these younger listeners in particular, I think if it's, for those of us who grew up in real time with Rumours, I think that we cannot help but look at it through the lens of the anger, the tension, the craziness of the sessions, everything that is happening, backstage, off stage, as they are writing and recording these songs. Anytime there's a list of the greatest breakup albums of all time, Rumours pins the #1 spot on those lists. But when you talk to people who are born 20 years after the album came out, I think they hear a lot of really different things. I think if they didn't have that experience, virtually all of them said, I don't think about this as a breakup record. I would never think of it. I mean, sure, there's angry stuff on there, but I think they hear You Make Lovin' Fun and the beginning of a relationship as much as they hear Go Your Own Way and the sort of breakup, as much as they hear The Chain and the sense that you're never really done with a person. They're a part of your life that you carry forward sort of whether you want to or not. They're still, a part of your experience. And I think particularly for young people who are going through their first relationships, their first heartbreaks, that spectrum of emotions is really what connects with them rather than just the chaos and the anger around it, which I just didn't hear them keying into the same way. So you get a lot of, I listen to it when I wake up in the morning when I'm getting ready for school, or before I go out with my friends, or when I'm running, or when I'm biking. It's a much more engaged and sort of warm connection to these songs than I think what we bring to it, remembering the time and all the baggage that it had with as it was happening.
Isn't that amazing? Because I was born in 72. So I'm part of the VH1 Behind the Music
Right.
crowd,
Right.
and I'd watched that special. I knew about the songs, but that got me listening to the album because of the drama that was happening within the band along with the songs. But yeah, it's interesting how it's coming to this new generation and how it's presented to them,
And listen, there were kids I talked to who are like, we're theater kids. We love the drama. We're super into all the lore and the story and the soap opera, and we follow all of that. There were others, some almost resented it and said, I don't like that gets in the way of listening to the record, that I have to think about that stuff. I just want to be able to listen to the songs. And there were some who really didn't. There was one girl I spoke to and said, when did you find out about all of the craziness and the soap opera and all that stuff? And she said, right now, when you just asked me, I don't know anything about any of that. And that has nothing to do with why I listen to this record or, what I think about these songs. I don't know about any of that stuff. So there's a really wide range of what what the relationship to the narrative is, the drama is, either connected to or not to the music.
I think this book is important for those in the marketing business and the record business to really understand how do you market these albums to a younger audience, because this is all like unintentional marketing. These are things that are just happening by accident. Because I worked with somebody in his 20s and he was telling me he knew about Aerosmith. And then I was shocked. And as you can see behind me, I'm a huge Van Halen fan. He goes, he says, yeah, wasn't Van Halen the band with a brown M&M story? I'm like, how did that even come to you? How do you even know about it? Did you find it out on YouTube? Like where, I don't even know where they're receiving this.
Some things just become
algorithm
myth, right?
Or whatever.
Yeah, just and a lot of the rumors. I mean, look, some of the the placement stuff, the using the chain in Guardians of the Galaxy and things like that.
Right.
They're at least they may be intentional on the part of the film.
Yeah, movies are big.
But they're intentional. Some of them, the TikTok stuff, nobody knows how that happens. I mean, how that that confrontational moment in Silver Springs, where you're talking about, where there was that happened at the reunion show in 1997, the dance that became such a huge moment in the reintroduction of Fleetwood Mac. But why within the last couple of years, that moment of Stevie Nicks picking up the mic, going over at the end of Silver Springs, singing those lines right into Lindsey Buckingham's face, that has become TikTok gold. And has almost become a moment that has been the introduction for a lot of kids to this album, to this project, for a song that wasn't even on the initial release of Rumours in the first place, and yet has become inextricably part of that story.
Yeah,
you can't make that up.
Being old school, I resist. I hate the idea that with this podcast, I do have to break down things into little minute-long shorts, and those get the most views than the ones that the long form and even maybe a 10-minute video. That is the reality, and if it works, it works. And film is a huge vehicle for like that. You hear these songs all the time in these movies, Marvel movies, but also television, like Glee played a role.
Well, I used that in the chapter about never going back again, because that was of that Glee episode, and there were a lot of again, if it's the sweet spot for age. There were a bunch of folks who, if they're sort of in their mid to late 20s, where their introduction to they were watching Glee, and their introduction to Rumours was, the first time that Glee did a full episode or on one album was an all Rumours episode that they did, and that was where a bunch of those whatever they were, 10 to 12-year-olds at the time, keyed into this album. And a lot of them talked about that note, the production of the Never Going Back Again performance on the show as sort of the most memorable. There was a sort of a production number around the kid who was in the wheelchair, where he breaks up with the girlfriend and goes through the hall singing that song, and a bunch of guitarists sort of gather behind him, and they end up on the stage with 20 guys playing acoustic guitars. And that was a moment that really stuck for a bunch of these listeners. But whatever it was, there are all of these different entry points in, and that was a thing that, I'm paraphrasing a little, but I talked to a guy named Michael Ozawaru, who's a producer, works with Beyonce and Frank Ocean and a bunch of sort of leading R&B artists. And he kind of said, when the way that you have to compete for attention now with the constant bombardment of input, that really having multiple entry points is an important thing. That you might notice something over here, hear the song over here, see a thing on TikTok, it's on TV, or it was in a movie trailer, and you sort of put together, oh, I guess this is all that thing, and maybe I'll give a listen to that thing. That it takes a couple different spins of the wheel sometimes for things to connect. And because Rumours has all of these different ways in for these kids, maybe it's Taylor Swift talking about Stevie Nicks, maybe it's Harry Styles, inducting Stevie into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or covers that they've done, or you see it in a film, or it's on TikTok, or whatever it is, that at a certain point it becomes, I guess this is a thing, I should see what that's about, since it kind of keeps coming up. He was pointing out what it means that it can connect with you from all these different directions.
Many small pieces of the pie to make up the pie now.
Right.
Where it used to be, get your song on the radio.
Yeah.
And tour. And then it became MTV radio tour. But now it's just splintered off into all these different areas.
But this is a thing that has, woven its way into all of this, all of these different media, all of these different ways in, that one way or another has continued to attract and continued to, to find new listeners over and over again.
Don't Stop is interesting. That holds a unique position, you say, on Rumours. It's the only song whose identity was redefined by historical events. Can you talk about that? And how much does the younger generation, do they even know about the whole Bill Clinton?
Yeah, I think that, the Bill, obviously, Don't Stop was sort of redefined, recontextualized when it was Bill Clinton's campaign theme in the 1992 election. Certainly an interesting story how that came to pass. But for purposes of these stories, a lot of the kids I was talking to were born well after that, or, at that time or whatever, have no direct memory or connection to that moment. But first of all, it did show that these songs could take on these new lives years after their release. That was 15 years after the album was out. And that did kind of set in motion what led to the reunion of the band, which led to that performance that became The Dance, which was then a big, huge success as a live album, ran constantly on MTV VH1, and put Fleetwood Mac just back into the world, back into circulation, brought some of these songs back up. And also then in interesting ways, Taylor Jenkins Reid, who wrote Daisy Jones and the Six, said that it was watching the dance performances when she was a kid and trying to figure out this dynamic, what was going on between Lindsay and Stevie, singing that Silver Springs performance, singing Landslide, and trying to understand what chemistry is happening that gets you to that moment. That was what inspired her to want to write a story about a band like that. So these things become these dominoes that fall, or sort of these dots that connect, where you get the Bill Clinton thing happening, gets the band back together, leads to this reunion. That reunion leads to somebody wanting to write a book understanding that moment. That gets a whole bunch of other new listeners in. Plus, out of that reunion comes this, years later, this TikTok thing that becomes its own phenomenon. So the ways that these things continue to feed off of each other and continue to sort of echo through the years is such an interesting thing. I mean, right before
Fascinated by all this.
I was looking at, right before the dance thing happened in that's 97, 98. 1997 was sort of peak women in rock moment. There, it's the first Lilith Fair is 97. And Rolling Stone, where I used to work, put out a book that year that was a sort of history of women in rock, book called Trouble Girls. And one day I was looking at the shelf and I was like, well, let me see what would a book like that have said about Fleetwood Mac or said about Stevie and Christine at that time. And I look in the book and there's basically one paragraph about Stevie Nicks, sort of in a chapter about like boho women, like she's between Kate Bush and I don't know, PJ Harvey. Like, here's sort of weird girls in rock. And that's it. The words Christine McVie do not appear in that book. So at that moment, sort of in between sort of the Bill Clinton thing and them actually getting back together, Fleetwood Mac are kind of nowhere, culturally. If you did a history of women in rock book today, Stevie Nicks is on your cover.
Right.
Like, without hesitation, right? There is no bigger female icon in rock history at this moment than Stevie is. And again, talking to these younger listeners, I think the gender mix and gender balance of the band is something that's really important to them. I think that they look at, rock bands and see 5 white guys with long hair and guitars and just think that's my parents' band. They look at the Eagles and just think that's got nothing to do with me. But at a moment where the culture, certainly music culture, is so driven by Taylor and Beyonce and Sabrina and Billie, and really all of the most important figures are these women, making this amazing music right now and really setting the direction and the tone for listeners today to look at this band that had not just one girl singer up front, sort of that configuration, but these 2 women who are both lead singers, songwriters, a point that a lot of particularly young women made to me, not put in competition with each other, but clearly doing different things, writing different kinds of songs and respecting what that is and present it as equals and collaborators. That's something that clearly rings out and is a much easier way into a band for young people today than looking at the sort of classic rock composition of like what we think of as 70s rock bands. That's something that people brought up over and over again.
Yeah. And even Christine said, I understand that she's the star. She's the people that, I understand that I'll do my thing over here. I have my role to play, but she's very underrated because she carried that band during the lean years.
And not just during the lean years. I mean, Christine has the most writing credits on Rumours, but we think of Rumours, it's the Stevie and Lindsay album. Christine has more songs and more credits than any out of the 3 of them. And if you look at the Fleetwood Mac Greatest Hits record, it's half Christine McVie songs, half Stevie or Lindsay songs. She's got as much as the other 2 combined on the Greatest Hits record. So a little more quietly, not that she isn't going through crazy drama as her marriage is falling apart during the Rumours sessions too, but maybe not historically, considered as central to what the record is, but absolutely is essential to not just what the Rumours album is, but as you're saying, to the full story of what Fleetwood Mac is.
Alan Light is the author of Don't Stop, Why We Still Love Fleetwood Mac's Rumours. Go Your Own Way addresses the breakup of Lindsay and Stevie, and you say it's difficult to figure out where it stands with listeners today. Some varied views on the song from the people you spoke to, possibly misread.
I don't know, misread. I think that to relate to the point that I was just talking about, if you are looking at Fleetwood Mac and something that's really important to you is this centering of female voices, is this empowerment of these 2 women who are 2 of the 3, persons of the band, this kind of hostile song from Lindsay can land, a little bit sour. I think for some of these listeners, I think they're not necessarily looking to cut Lindsey Buckingham the same kind of break as the angry songs that you get from the other guy. There's no shortage of anger in the other songs as well. But I think there's a little more pushback when you're hearing it from the guy in the band. Clearly it's not and Stevie has said she has mixed emotions about that song. She always hated singing some of those lines. She hated singing the, packing up, shacking up's all you want to do line. She said was very unfair to her and to their story. So, I think there is some resentment about, some of the stuff, some of the Lindsay expression within the band. But what you really cannot separate is even at the worst, the lowest points of the breakup of the whatever's going on between Lindsay and Stevie, that Stevie is very upfront about. He was the guy who knew what to do with my songs. I would go off and write these Dreams is this 2-chord song. I wrote it. It was 7 minutes long and had all these verses. Christine McVie says, Stevie brought this song in, and I was like, this song is really boring. Why would we ever record that? This is a mess. And Lindsay takes it and figures out how to edit it, how to arrange it, where to, bring the guitar in, where to bring the different sounds in, how Stevie should present it. Comes back. Christine's like, well, this is a great song. Of course we should record that song. And it becomes their only #1 hit in their entire career. And Stevie said, whatever was going on between, me and Lindsay, he understood the stuff that I was writing and how to take these songs and turn them into records. So any, understandable, sort of side eye that you might take at Lindsay and, him taking over the band too much or forcing some of these emotions that maybe weren't totally fair into these songs. Also, what he was able to do to create the sort of sonic vision and architect these songs, including in some ways, especially the Stevie songs, is absolutely imperative to understanding this album.
Sure, absolutely. And I don't think there's ever been a song prior to this song, Go Your Own Way, with that much aggression. The Bob Welch years, very mellow. Prior to that, Peter Green, very bluesy. There was I was listening back through all of the albums and trying to find something where Loving You isn't the right thing to do. That's just like,
right.
Whoa.
That's where we're coming in.
That's where it starts.
Line 1, that's where we're coming in. Right.
Yeah.
And look, that balance, I talked to a guy named, Julian Bonetta, who's a songwriter who wrote the big Sabrina Carpenter songs and a bunch of One Direction songs and like a big pop songwriter. And he said some great things throughout, but he also said one thing about Rumours that's so extraordinary is it's never too much of one thing, right? It's a rock record, but it doesn't have 5-minute guitar solos. It's a pop record. It's a yacht rock record. It's smooth, but it's not too smooth. It's, British and it's American, like whatever you want to take, there's this incredible sort of tightrope balance that this record presents. So you get the rock of Go Your Own Way or of The Chain, but then you get the ballads, you get the more, you get the acoustic stuff, you get the more sort of soulful stuff on the Stevie songs, and it never tips too far. There's the Lindsay playing, like there's great sort of rock jam stuff on it, but that doesn't take over anything. And so, anybody, whatever it is that you want, whatever it is that you react to, it's in there and it's not getting overwhelmed by any other particular element.
And they didn't have, I don't think Lindsay had that foresight, but it just turned out that these songs age that way. Songbird is a great example of why the longevity of this album. Here's a song that people came around to, but not right away. Years later, they go back and listen, like I did that. Songbirds, this is an absolutely beautiful song.
And it's interesting. A lot of the younger people said, I didn't get that at first. When I first started listening to this album and I was 15, like I didn't want to hear a quiet, spare ballad. Like, I didn't have the patience for it. I didn't really respond to the emotion of that. But as I sort of matured a little bit, got a little bit more life on me, that became a favorite. That became a song that I turned to as I felt like I could understand it. And I tell the story in the book of, because some people came to that song through that woman Eva Cassidy, who was this soul pop jazz singer in out of Washington D.C., who also sort of didn't get discovered until after her death, got embraced initially in England on the BBC and became a huge her sort of posthumous album became a massive hit in England and then came back. It was used also in a bunch of soundtracks. That's the version that you hear in Love Actually, since we are in the holiday season and people would be watching Love Actually. That was the version that was there. That's many years down the road. I mean, that's years till she records it. It was the Songbird was the title song for Eva's big album. And then after she dies, then people turn to that and that becomes it extends over decades, that story. And yet that's how a lot of people came into that song and then found their way back into this record.
The Chain, the second most streamed song on Spotify from that album, Behind Dreams. Why that wasn't released as a single?
And not even a single.
Right. Why do you think people take to that song so much?
I think that
besides that it's a great song. I mean,
besides
the
that it's
bass
a great
line,
song.
you can't avoid that bass line.
Friends who are bass players are like, that bass line is kind of for bass players what Smoke on the Water is for the guitar.
Right.
Then you pick up a bass, that's the first thing you try to pick out. I mean, The Chain is fascinating. It's certainly had other uses. It was in England, it was the theme to the Formula One broadcasts for about a dozen years. Which is a big deal in the UK, increasingly a big deal here as well. But lots of usages in films, in soundtracks. Again, Guardians of the Galaxy, a big placement. But that one, I think that rock radio also came to embrace over time. As it never wasn't. I think I talked to a guy named Sean Ross, who's a big radio analyst guy, who was like, that song got played like it was a single. Maybe not in the moment of the record, but afterwards, as much as the singles did. And I think if you were going to distill that album down to one song, which is a difficult thing to do, I mean, The Chain is the one song that has a writing credit for all 5 members because of the instrumental section. And the assembly of it is fascinating. It's 3 different songs that get put together, again, to that vision of Lindsey Buckingham. Christine's working on a song and like the chord changes are good, but the lyrics aren't right. She can't find the melody. Meantime, Stevie's working on a completely different song. And he's like, well, we could try that melody and words over this shell of a song that Christine's working on. I think those could kind of sync up. Stevie, to this day, with slightly mixed feelings, saying, that could have just been a song that I recorded, would have been my song, but is talked into handing it over. They put those songs together. There's this instrumental jam thing that they did early on in the process when they were working on the Christine song. It's like, well, if I can come up with this connecting section, so now we've got a melody of this thing that fits with the harmony and the structure of this thing. And then we can go into this other thing that we played. And then he puts on this a guitar figure that he pulled from one of a song on the Buckingham Nicks album. That's that little sort of acoustic fill at the top that comes between the verses. And he puts all of that together and comes up with The Chain, which is just, how do you hear in your head
he's a mad
the way
genius.
that all of that stuff,
yeah,
you're a crazy mad scientist at that point. Like there's no way around it. So I love the story of The Chain, just in general, plus how all of that goes with this theme, with what the song is about, that, relationships are never over, that you carry them forward, that these people are a part of your life, as you move on. All of that is sort of how this song comes together. And it just continues to grow the momentum around it continues to grow over the years, and obviously it's one of the first things we think of when we think of Rumours.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. You Make Loving Fun is one of those songs that manages to win over even those who aren't Fleetwood Mac fans. Michelangelo Matos.
Yes.
Right? He has a great story about that.
Yeah, I love that story. Michelangelo, who's a writer in Minneapolis, talks about going to a party and somebody saying, I don't really get Fleetwood Mac. And he's like, no, you gotta understand Fleetwood Mac, and you gotta understand Fleetwood Mac, among other things, and he's written a lot about dance music, can be a dance band. That these can be, there's sort of a funky thing in some of these songs, and puts on You Make Lovin' Fun. And the guy hears that groove and hears that bass line and is like, oh, well, okay. Yeah, I get that. I can hear that. Which is particularly fascinating because Christine McVie writes that song about her new boyfriend, who is the band's lighting director, just to add to the chaos of all of this. And yet, here's her ex-husband playing the bass line that in some ways, locks that song down, playing this fantastic bass part that gives it that propulsion, that gives it that groove that he's got to sit there and play as she's singing about this new dude that she's seeing now.
Unreal. I think
it's just none of it, makes any sense at all. And yet this is what you're left with. It's all of these ingredients. And I think somebody makes the point that if you know the story and you know the details, that's one thing. But even if you don't, you can hear these layers, this depth, this richness to whatever is going on in the studio. You feel that in these songs, that there is they're just dimensions to these performances that are coming from someplace, are coming from emotions that are banging around in that room and that are inescapable as you hear these songs.
Maybe beyond the actual skills, the musical talents is the fact that they were all able to step aside for the greater cause, to be able to say, I will record a song with my ex-wife talking about a guy she's with, and Stevie and, just saying, look, I need Lindsay. He's driving me mad. I can't stand him right now. I don't want to be in the same room with him, but I get what he's doing, his importance, and vice versa. Lindsay.
And they say that, look, whatever was going on, we knew that these songs were something really special, that something was happening. And I think there's a quote from Stevie in the book where she's like, what were we going to do? Like, we were going to quit and go start new bands? Like, that would be stupid. And I talked to Cameron Crowe for the book, who wrote the famous Rolling Stone cover story that came out at the time, very famous cover photo of the five of them in bed together. And he said, look, they, obviously the tension was what it was, and the relationships, what was happening, but they also knew what they had, and they were ready to put that out in the world. And knowing that they were, from the album title on down, knowing that leaning into this narrative and to all of the gossip column stuff and to everything that was happening inescapably was going to be part of this story. And they were not resistant to that. They were not afraid of that. They knew that they had made something great. They were committed to these songs, and they whatever it took, they were going to see that through. Defines what an artist is, putting it all into your art. Into the work, into these songs, singing, because it's inconceivable, right? Stevie and Lindsay break up. John and Christine get divorced. Mick and his wife get divorced. Mick and Stevie have an affair. Right. Christine starts dating one of the crew. all of this is happening, and yet they're showing up in the studio every day, singing these songs, writing these songs, recording these songs about each other and about what they're going through, and sitting there together working this stuff out. It is unimaginable what that was. And look, that's a story. You said there was the behind the music, there was the classic albums episode. Ken Calais, who co-produced the record, he wrote a book about it. There was even
I had him on for his book on Tusk. I didn't have him on for Rumours.
There was this play Stereophonic last year that won the Tony for Best Play of the Year. That is a very, very mildly fictionalized version of the Rumours story, to a point that Ken Calais ended up suing them, saying that too much of this was taken from his book, which it was. And yet, people still love this story. They still love what that is. I didn't need to write that book. I needed to do enough of the context, you have to know what I'm talking about. But again, what I really wanted to look at was not just the making of story, but the afterlife, the legacy, and this endless popularity, and why people keep turning to it over and over and over again. The story itself, we know, is astounding and weaves its way in through all of this stuff. But also there are places to turn to be able to get that.
That's what I love about the book. Yeah. The angle that it takes and the way you look at the album from that aspect. Saturday Night Live is another vehicle, right? For a bizarre choice. I don't want to know, which I love. This maybe my favorite deep track off the album. But this skit was
Paul Rudd.
Paul Rudd and Claire Mullaney was the staff writer who chose it.
So yeah, there was this sketch, and it's funny. There have been just weird Fleetwood Mac references on Saturday Night Live over the years, right? There was Lindsey Buckingham as a recurring punchline on the "What's Up with That" sketch that Kenan Thompson did. The end of every sketch was, we have Lindsey Buckingham, and then it was Bill Hader, I guess, and they would never let him talk, but he would just sit there in the funny haircut and the leather jacket. But there was this sketch that's Paul Rudd and Vanessa Bayer, one of the cast members, and the joke is they're getting divorced, they're meeting with their divorce lawyers, they're trying to sketch out their agreement or whatever it is, and they're fighting, and it's increasingly absurd what they're fighting about. And then every minute, "I Don't Want to Know" starts playing, which turns out to be on Kenan Thompson's. It's his ringtone on his phone. But when that song starts playing, they can't be mad at each other, and they start doing ridiculous dance. And I was like, what the hell? 25 years after this album came out, or whatever it was, 30 years, the whole premise of the punchline of a whole sketch is this song that, as you said, is a deep cut, like not one of the big songs on the album, not something you ever hear on the radio. So I wanted to figure out how did you settle on that? And so, knowing people who know the writers, I chased down that it was Claire Mullaney, who was John Mulaney's sister. He was a head writer on SNL, but it was her sketch that she had written, and talked to her about it. She said it was something that she had developed doing, at her improv group in Chicago before she came, and just said, like, everybody loves Rumours. That was the perfect, like, the way that song starts with the stop and the start guitar and the drums coming in, like, it was just the right mood. And I never thought about using anything else. And I was like, okay, but did everybody else get it? Like, were people like, what is this song? Like, what are you even talking about?
Yes.
It's like, I don't know. The crew loved it. We were getting laughs, and we just sort of went with it. So it was so wild to me. Like, it's one thing to do that if the punchline, not that it would work for this punchline, but we're "Go Your Own Way" and everybody knows the song, and okay, this was not that. This is, one of, if not the least known songs on this album, and yet there it was getting laughs at 11:45 on a Saturday night.
Yeah, and here it is, another vehicle to introduce a song from the album to millions of people.
So once you start looking, you start finding these things that are out there, these examples, and similarly looking for young people to talk to about the album. I wish I could pretend I was such a great reporter that I could go out and dig up these kids and find them. I did a lame, super vague social media post.
Yeah.
Hey, anybody have kids or young friends or relatives who are into rumors? I think I booked 13 interviews the next day, which is also totally validating because you're like, oh, okay, it really is out there that it's easy to, it's easy to find a group of young people who are into this. And then once you start looking, there were these two younger women who were sitting behind me and my wife at the Stevie Nicks show at Madison Square Garden. I'm like, well, I gotta ask them. I just have to figure out how to not be a creepy older guy asking for their number. Like, to be like, I'm here with my wife. I'll give you my email. You write to me.
Just so you know.
Just so you know. They were great. And then you just start running into, oh, we've got an intern this semester, this summer, who was talking about how much he loves Rumours. Or my favorite, I grew up in Cincinnati. I'm a big Cincinnati Reds fan. I'm a big baseball guy.
Nice.
And I follow a guy on social media who's like the Reds, big sports guy there, does a Reds thing on the radio, whatever. And in one of his columns mentioned, my daughter was talking about listening to Rumours the other day. So I'm like, okay, wrote him. Like, if you can send me your daughter, connect me to her. Love to talk to her for the book. Just sort of finding people out there who, one way or another led me to these post millennials, Gen Zs, and down to like 15, 16-year-olds who were all said how important this album was in their lives. Was a great journey to go on.
Yeah, it gives you a great idea. And I like the fact that there's a wide array of responses. We talked about Oh Daddy, but there were some that loved the song. I mean, that's the weakest link on the album, but not everybody agreed that it was the weakest song.
No, I mean, it turns out when you see, I think I started with some, Reddit page that was like, what's the worst song on Rumours? And that was the most votes went to that. But there were even people defending it, saying, no, it's great. That has to be there. But okay, if that emerges as the one that people point to, and I can see maybe the daddy thing creeps people out a little bit, maybe in 2025. Okay, I understand. But look, I placed a big bet that people would be interested in reading what a bunch of young people they don't know have to say about this album. I mean, that's not the whole book, but it sort of builds to identifying this phenomenon, teasing it through all these examples, and then kind of talking to these kids about, okay, what's that about? What does it mean for you? How did you find it? What does resonate? And I didn't know what I was going to get back from them, and if that was a thing that I could really, build as part of the skeleton of this book. But they all had such strong thoughts and such strong feelings about it, and all really had stuff to say, that I felt like, okay, this is gonna carry its weight as a central element to what I want to do here.
And an underlying strength that resonates with Gold Dust Woman.
People respond to the Stevie. Look, the cult of Stevie runs very, very deep.
Right.
Particularly for young women. I mean, the icon that she has become. And I can't fully figure it out, because I remember going to see Stevie Nicks a dozen years ago, maybe, at the Beacon Theater. Show was great. I'm like, okay, she's out here. She can sell out theaters. She's got a career. She's doing great. Show was awesome. And then 5 years later, she's selling out Madison Square Garden. And then 5 years later, she's co-headlining stadiums with Billy Joel.
Isn't that amazing?
And it's not like there was some big Stevie Nicks hit in the last 10 years that would have accelerated this embrace of Stevie as a superstar. It just has been this snowball. Again, I think between Taylor Swift talking about her, Harry Styles talking about her, all of this Fleetwood Mac stuff, and just the sort of iconic female, the strength that she represents, the independence that she represents, how she, stands for this generation. But it is kind of unbelievable how much the popularity and the importance of Stevie Nicks has expanded in the last 10, 15 years, just kind of based on her, like not out of anything that you can point to and say, oh, okay, it's because of this thing that happened. So Goldust Woman, obviously a central piece of, the Stevie story and her telling her story. Goldust Woman was also the opportunity in the book to talk about drugs and rumors, which I think is a thing that you have to address somewhere, what that did to these sessions and these relationships, and what getting the record done required or was fighting against, or however you want to look at it. So in terms of looking again song by song, that was a window to sort of plug that piece of the story in as well.
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. Seeing Stevie get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist, and seeing and reading about how essentially Lindsay was out of Fleetwood Mac because it was an ultimatum. It's me or him. And at that point they were like, yeah, you know what, Stevie, you're it.
Stevie holds all the cards,
and that's strength. I think that's the strength that people are.
They can go be Fleetwood Mac with Stevie Nicks in the band, right, and Lindsey Buckingham not. They cannot go out and be Fleetwood Mac with Lindsey in the band and not Stevie. So that, and yes, being the first woman inducted twice into the Rock Hall as a solo artist, in addition to as part of the band, was certainly a big, a pivotal moment, a marker for her.
I wonder how much too. Also, the fact that she's like, I'm never going to get married. She did get married, but she realized music is the love of my life. That is it. I'm not going to. And I think there's something to be said to that too.
Just the other week, when Taylor Swift was on Stephen Colbert to promote the new Era's docuseries, he asked her, who can give you advice? Like, who do you turn to and listen to what they say? The first thing she said was, I am lucky enough to be friends with Stevie Nicks. That is somebody I can turn to who can, give me guidance and has had the experience that she's had. And I'm very fortunate that I have that. That was the first thing out of her mouth. So, we see it paid forward like that.
Silver Springs, we talked about it. Why was it left off again?
So the official reason that Silver Springs was not on the initial album was this was back in the days when LPs, when albums came out as LPs, and you could basically only have 20 minutes of music. You could maybe stretch to 22 minutes of music on a side of an album, or you started to really degrade the sonic quality. The grooves got too narrow, and you started to lose sound. It wasn't as loud, it wasn't as rich when you cut the album. So having Silver Springs on there would have made the album too long, would have taken it up over 45 minutes. So that's the official reason. The other complicated reasons were, would you really want Dreams and Goldust Woman and Silver Springs, kind of three of these big Stevie style, sort of mid-tempo, that kind of a feel? Was that going to overwhelm the balance of the record too much? Did Lindsey have issues with, that this is another song about him, and was there anything personal that he was bringing into that? He says it was not about that. It was really just about, it wouldn't fit. So we had to take it off. Replaced with I Don't Want to Know. Went on. She still got another writing credit on the album. It didn't cost her that, but a 2.5-minute song instead of a 5.5-minute song. So it was the B-side of Go Your Own Way. It was not on the album. But then CDs come out, length doesn't matter anymore. You can do 75 minutes on a CD. So now Silver Springs goes back on the album. Now the question is, where do you put it? The album exists, and there are different CDs, there were different pressings that have Silver Springs in different places on the album. There are some where it's basically between the first and the second side, where it goes between Songbird and the Chain in the middle. And then there are others where it's at the end, where then you get Gold Dust Woman and Silver Springs back to back, which is weird.
Yeah.
So, and then of course,
who made that call? Who had the?
I assume Warner Brothers made the call. I don't know. And then you get to streaming, of course, and you get the super deluxe box set, and it's all just in there. So it really, when you came to Rumours, determines whether you think Silver Springs is on this album or not. I got to use the phrase Schrodinger's Rumours because here is a song that simultaneously is and is not on this album, depending which version of the album is your introduction to the album. But again, now, particularly because of this TikTok thing, it's absolutely a central piece of the story of this album, and I couldn't not address it and not deal with it, both to be able to tell that story, but then also to talk about, what that performance at the dance was about, her very pointedly turning it into this sort of accusatory confrontational song, and then how that has lived on, particularly through this kind of TikTok explosion in the last couple of years.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com. Make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. So I want to finish by asking you what you think of the album now. More importantly, what do you feel when you listen to it today compared to when you first heard it? Has it changed?
Look, happily, I do still love it. This is an album I bought when I was 11 years old. It was one of the first albums that I bought. I remember hearing those songs on the radio and, what that was to initially hear this record and love it then. But obviously you hear it through different ears this many years later, this many different, parts of this story. And I think that, two things that really stuck out to me. One, as I said before, hearing this spectrum of emotions that I think a lot of these newer listeners hear in this album, not defining it so much as the tension and breakup album, but hearing all of the different aspects that are on there. I mean, of course we know that, but that over time, that really becomes, that it is a much richer and much deeper tale that is being told in these songs. And the other thing that really stuck with me is, I talked to a bunch of producers, and I talked to this woman, Emily Lazar, who's a mastering engineer who's won Grammys and done thousands of records, worked with Beck and the Foo Fighters and Haim and lots of the great rock bands today. And she said, these bands come to me and I ask them, what do you want your record to sound like? She's like, and most of them say, well, we want it to sound like Rumours. And she says, okay, but what does that mean to you? When you say that, what are you talking about? And they say, well, we want it to sound organic and warm and live and kind of rich and woody. And she says, okay, I get what you're talking about, but Rumours is actually none of those things. The only thing that is live on Rumours is that instrumental part of the chain. Everything else on this record was overdubbed. Every part was played separately, to a point where there's a moment where the physical tapes of the album were about to fall apart. The tape was coming off of the backing, and they had to do this crazy, bring in an engineer who could sync up and recut the tape to match so that they had a version they could work with, or they were going to lose the whole album. So there's nothing organic about Rumours at all. It's this perfectly constructed thing. And talking to Mark Ronson about it also, as a producer and a DJ, and he's like, we think of it like we think about a Steely Dan record, like we think it's this pristine 70s thing. But actually, if you listen to those parts, there's some real sort of rough, raw stuff on there. There's parts where Mick Fleetwood is just beating the hell out of the drums. There's parts that are a little distorted and kind of frayed. And that's what gives the album more life. That's where you hear this emotion that we're talking about. It's not perfect. It's not immaculate, right? And that's where you feel that energy. And so I think we bring these associations we think about the time and the album cover and the clothes they were wearing and the shag carpeting. Like, we think about it so much that, we associate it to this time and place and bring all that in when we listen to Rumours that isn't actually what Rumours sounds like. And I thought, though, that was a really, really interesting thing to think about, and to think about more broadly how we listen to stuff. How much of that is all of everything that we bring in our brain that we attach to the time and where we heard it and how we listened to it and how we were exposed to it, that isn't really an accurate representation of what it is. Doesn't make it less valid. Doesn't mean that stuff isn't true and isn't there in our head, but it may or may not actually be what the thing is. So I think those were the things that sort of opened up for me in researching this and sort of trying to connect the dots through the years. Were, we all have these conceptions, and younger listeners do have these conceptions of what this album is. That's part of it. And then there are all of these other parts, and that's where all these other people can find their way into it. All of these kids talked about, of course, my parents had Rumours. Everybody had Rumours. We grew up with it in the house. But I don't listen to this album for nostalgia. This album had to become my album and had to become about my relationship to this album. That's why I care about this. I don't care about this because my parents, or God help us, my grandparents, in some cases, listened to this album. I was aware of it, but until I could make it mine, that's when it really mattered to me. And that's the experience we all go through with the music that we love. I mean, there's stuff that we listen to, it reminds us of a time, it takes us to that place. But if we don't feel it for ourselves, that isn't, we don't care about it in that same way. That's what I got to hear over and over. And that's really powerful to hear about, any piece of music. I've been talking to kids about music that they love, but also, we do this stuff every day. You get jaded about it. You get cynical. You feel like, music doesn't mean what it used to. It's not as important as it used to be. It's not like it was. You talk to these kids about their feelings for these songs, and you feel that power and you feel how important it is. That's inspiring. That's what keeps me wanting to pay attention to this stuff.
I'd love to hear that. Don't stop while we still love Fleetwood Mac's Rumours, out now. Find it wherever books are sold. Look for it at your nearest bookstore. You can go to bookedonrock.com to find your nearest independent bookstore. See if you can pick up a copy there. Where can people find you online, Alan?
Well, the best place right now is over on the podcast that I co-host with my friend Mark Goodman. We spent a bunch of years on Sirius XM together doing a show daily, and
I listened.
Our channel got shut down, so we've been doing that. So Sound Up is our podcast, sounduppod.com. You can find us there, but we're up every week. And that's kind of the best place to see what's going on in my world.
Alan Light, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really was looking forward to this. This was great.
Eric, absolutely a pleasure. Thanks for bringing me on.
That's it. It's in the books.